Hey Jazz Guitar Lifers, and welcome back to the channel. And if you're new, welcome as well. I just want to start off with a somber note saying that I send my prayers and thoughts out to those who are struggling, battling the fires in LA and surrounding areas. It's just a tragedy. You know, some people have lost their lives, many have lost their homes, many have lost their livelihoods because of all the equipment, and I'm talking about musicians in this general area, have lost their gear. I heard today that the great jazz guitar player Brian Hughes, who's from originally from out west Canada, I believe, who now lives in, I will get it in a second, Altadena. He lost his home with the Eaton fires as they destroyed his main place of residence. Lost all his recording studio, his gear, his guitars, everything. And it's just sad, sad, sad. For those who know Brian, then you don't need an introduction. But if you don't know Brian Hughes, please check him out on YouTube, on Google. Check out his music. He's a great player. He's kind of in the style of Pat Metheny, and you know, maybe Lee Ritenour in that type of genre. And it's just tragic that he's lost his gear. I'm assuming that there are others, guitar players, jazz guitar players out there who have lost their stuff as well. I haven't heard any names. I've heard some close calls, but hopefully people can just rebuild and get back on track as soon as possible. If there's any way that we can help them, please do so. I know there's a lot of GoFundMe pages popping up. There's a lot of, and just the support from the community could be really well deserved. So check those people out. Also, John Clayton, the great bass player who played on that album with Bruce Forman called Reunion, John Clayton, Bruce Forman, and Jeff Hamilton on drums. Apparently his home was destroyed, and he lost at least one bass that was given to him by the great Ray Brown. I don't know if it was the bass that was played on that Reunion album, but it's just sad all around. So please, everybody, just send out your thoughts and your prayers. Now, I've got a couple of things to talk about today, so let's get started. First of all, today is January 17th, 2025, and there's a video that's been dropped by the great Gilad Hekselman, a great guitar player out of New York City who's been in that on the scene for at least the past 2 decades. He's coming out with a new album April 25th of this year called Downhill From Here, but he released the first video from that album today on YouTube and a bunch of other platforms. It is called Wise Man, and I will put a link to it below, and you should check it out. It's really good. If you know Gilad, he's just an amazing player. He's, you know, more in the modern jazz setting than maybe like a Barney Kessel or a Joe Pass or whatever. But he's just, he's burning. He's a great player. He's a great composer. I love his stuff. I think he's great. And I've known him for a long, I mean, I haven't known him personally, but I've known of him for a long time. And he's just a great cat to listen to. So check that out. That's out today, the video, and then the album coming out on April 25th. And on that album, Larry Grenadier on bass and Marcus Gilmore on drums. So you know what's going down. I mean, you know that there's going to be a lot of interplay. There's going to be a lot of musical empathy. You know, use all the adjectives you want to describe this music. It's going to happen on that album. And I think you'll see it when you watch the first video from that new album coming out. So check that out. Speaking of new albums, Karl Latham, or Latham, I'm hoping it's Latham, has also dropping an album today, coming out with a new album called Living Standards 2. And, you know, he's a drummer, so why am I featuring him on Jazz Guitar Life? Well, because his first album, Living Standards 1, featured the great and late Vic Juris. Vic, as you know, is an exceptional guitar player, was an exceptional guitar player, and still is in a sense. I mean, his legacy lives on with his recordings and his teaching methods, and the students that have taught under him and who have gone out into the world to preach everything Juris. He was just a great player. And Living Standards 1, I had the pleasure of reviewing on Jazz Guitar Life. I'll put a link below if you want to check that out. What they do is so basically the standards they're talking about are not jazz standards, but they're rock standards. Stuff like White Rabbit from, Jefferson Starship. What else? So I got some notes here. Cinnamon Girl from Neil Young, Day Tripper from the Beatles, Us and Them by Pink Floyd, and a great and surprising version of Cream's White Room, where Vic just reinvents it, basically. And that's the beauty of that album and the second album, Living Standards 2, which I've had the pleasure of listening to a preview copy of. Just great reinventions of these songs that you would not expect, really. Herbie Hancock did it on his New Standards album back in the 90s. There's been a few players who have gone that route. Dave Stryker, for example, his 8-track series has taken pop songs from the 70s and converted them made them into his own, basically, by adding a jazz element to them and harmonically making them a little bit more interesting. Although the originals are still great, so don't take anything away from that. But I love it when you get guys like Vic and Karl, where they just reinterpret the songs to almost make it their own, which is really great. But it still retains the spirit of the original songs going back to the 70s and 80s. On Living Standards 2, so Living Standards 1, Karl Latham, Vic Juris on guitar, Karl on drums, of course, and Mark Egan on bass. And we all know Mark Egan from Elements and from the Pat Metheny group, the original early group, the White Album especially. Just a great player. And Mark's been on the scene forever and just kills it. So he's on this second album, Living Standards 2, with Karl, Mark. They've got a new guitar player. They tried out, Karl was telling me, they tried out a few guitar players until they've finally welcomed the great guitar player Mitch Stein into the band. Mitch is a great player. I hadn't heard of him before, but that doesn't mean anything really, because he's just a great player. I've since found out about him. He's played with Tanya Maria. He's played with the Brecker Brothers. He's played with a whole bunch of this serious cats, and he shines on this new album. And the great thing about it is he's not trying to replace Vic. He's just an additional member in a sense. I think Vic's spirit will always be in this band, given the way they reinterpret the songs, and I think Vic had a lot to do with that. Of course, like I said, Mark Egan on bass, and they've got 3 other players that they've brought in as well. Henry Hay on keyboards, the percussionist Roger Squittetto, really nice player, and a special guest vibraphonist Wolfgang Lackerschmidt. So definitely check that out. I will put a link below to both where you can listen to or find out more information about that album on Karl's website, and I will also put a link to the Jazz Guitar Life review. Cheers. And you can check that out and make up your own mind if you like it or not. So, now, speaking of Jazz Guitar Life, I also published this week a featured interview with the New York City guitar player David Rourke. I mentioned David Rourke in my last video because he did a 5 desert island pick feature for Jazz Guitar Life. This time it's a full interview. David is only 26 and has already done a lot of great things and will continue to do great things because he's just dedicated. His work ethic is amazing. He's just deep, deep, deep into the community. Like I said, he's born in Montreal, but he's now has been in New York for a few years, and it's a great interview to read because of the fact that he's so young, and the fact that he's done a lot to get where he is today, just through sheer determination. So, if you're a younger player, if you're thinking about moving to New York, if you're thinking about trying to get better, if you're thinking about all these things that we all think about as we begin our careers in music, then definitely, hopefully you'll be inspired by what David Rourke has to say. Just a great player. And I've included his YouTube channel link on there. You can get to hear him perform live. And he does some great transcriptions, which he makes a few bucks from as well. So, that's something to kind of think about when you're, in between gigs and you're wondering how you're going to pay the rent. You may get some ideas from what David has done. So definitely check that out. Of course, I'll leave the link below. And also I published a Jazz Guitar Beauty article on Jazz Guitar Life this week as well, featuring a beautiful Benedetto Fratello archtop guitar owned by Ken Lewis. Ken, I believe, is out of Florida or Tampa, Florida, or around those parts. Really nice player. I think he's got like a day job, but that is not in music. But his passion, now that he's retired, is jazz guitar and all that he can offer it and all that he can get from it. So definitely check out that. It's just a gorgeous guitar, and he's a great portrait artist. I've also included in that article some of his sketches, his pencil portraits featuring Pat Martino and Charlie Christensen and somebody else who I can't remember at the moment, but just Joe Pass. So a great player, a great artist, both figuratively and metaphorically. So check that out as well. I'll put the link to that below. And before I say goodbye, and this is just kind of a very quick video. Two things. One is that I recently been listening to Steve Kahn's Eyewitness, and I don't know if obviously you should know who Steve Kahn is. He's this dude here. I don't know if you can see him. There he goes. This is a great album. It was, I believe, the first album that he came out with when his musical voice kind of shifted a bit from the kind of jazz rock stuff that he was doing as a solo artist and with the Brecker Brothers and with a band called Alive Mother For Ya. Just those early albums featured a more funk groove jazz thing that had a lot of overdrive guitars, slap bass, great musicians and great music, but a little different than Eyewitness, which all of a sudden featured Steve on a very clean sounding Gibson ES335, no pedals, no overdrive, just the amp, his guitar, and a little bit of reverb, and just a great album. I didn't dig it when I first bought it back in the day. This is from 1981, this album. I didn't dig it because I was still really liking his rockier jazzy stuff, and I put it on the shelf basically for a few years, didn't go to it, Then eventually I went to it because my taste started maturing, I guess, a little bit. I didn't, but my taste did. And then I started digging it. And then I got into his other albums, which I will talk about at a later date. And just a great player, a great composer. If you go on his website, and I'll leave a link below, there is a personal anecdote about how this album came to be, and there's also a lead sheet, and he breaks the song "Eyewitness" down in bite-sized chunks so that you can really analyze it and get into it. Really good stuff. So Steve on guitar, Anthony Jackson on bass, Steve Jordan on drums, and Manola Badarena on percussion. Very nice album. And his voice kept on going in that direction, and he kept getting into the more of the Latin type stuff. Not that it's, not that it takes away from what he did before, but it's just a different style. And it was just wonderful. So check that stuff out. And I also wanted to say before I go that, Jazz Guitar Life, while having a lot of interviews and a lot of reviews of the great players on the scene today, we also have a podcast section. And it's got 25 podcasts up there now. I featured guys like Bobby Broom, Grant Geisman, David Becker, Royce Campbell, Bruce Foreman, John Pizzarelli, of course, Dave Stryker, who last week I mentioned had 2 podcasts up there. Actually, he has 3, and will soon have a 4th, as I will be talking to him in the next day or two about his latest album, Stryker Goes to the Movies. And so, I like to keep the site always growing. I like to try and do things that, like the podcasts to me are very special because you actually get to hear the voice of the artist I'm interviewing. It's fine to read the interviews, on typed text when you're looking at a website, but to really hear their voice, I think that's an extra step that makes it all more legit. So definitely check that out. And other than that, if you like this video, please, comment, subscribe, like. I'd love to hear what albums you're listening to, what guitar players you're digging these days. Feel free to leave anything you want in the comments, or you can email me at info@thejazzguitarlife.com, info@thejazzguitarlife.com. And that's it. So take care. Have a good week. Hopefully I'll see you next week. And remember, jazz guitar lives at Jazz Guitar Life. Take care.